The heart breaks only so you can finally find yourself. Eric Maria Remarque. Before we begin, here's a small ritual. Write in the comments one word that accurately describes your current state. Sign it, and let's get started. There is a silence that comes after the storm, and it is not the silence of peace, but the silence of collapse. When a heart breaks, it is not just an organ torn apart by love. It is the temple of illusions crumbling, the collapse of a carefully built dream. What we call heartbreak is the moment when the world we believed in burns down, leaving us naked in front of ourselves. In the ruins of love, a person stands stripped of their masks. The face they see in the mirror is no longer the one they crafted for others, but the raw, trembling face of someone reborn through pain. Love, in its most common form, is a projection. We fall not in love with another, but with the reflection of our own needs, hopes, and wounds. When a heart shatters, it takes down the mirror, and for the first time, we face the truth. That truth cuts deep. We see that we were not loving the other. We were loving the echo of ourselves, the comfort they gave, the sense of worth they reflected. This realization stings because it unmasks our hunger, our clinging, our desperate need to matter in someone's eyes. But in this bitter moment, something extraordinary happens. We discover the prison we were locked in was one of our own making. And now, with the walls gone, there is a terrifying freedom. People believe heartbreak weakens them, but it does something far more radical. It forces them to meet themselves without distraction. It forces them to stand in the middle of the wreckage and understand what remains when all attachments fall away. At first, what remains feels like emptiness, but slowly, that emptiness turns into a spaciousness where new life can begin. Heartbreak wipes away the false stories. It forces a person to see where they pretended, where they overgave, where they betrayed themselves to be loved. In this raw honesty, there is pain, but there is also liberation. Without the constant maintenance of a crumbling love, energy is freed, attention turns inward, and the person who wants to find themselves by someone else starts to reclaim their own life. This is the beginning of the great turning point. In the solitude of heartbreak, a person begins to hear the faint voice that was buried beneath compromise and performance. It is the voice of their authentic self, fragile but persistent, whispering of desires long ignored, of dreams postponed, of boundaries violated. What a broken heart gives, more than anything, is the chance to strip away the noise and finally listen. It gives the chance to come home, not to the safety of another's arms, but to the fierce, quiet strength within. This strength is not built overnight. It comes in waves, in small acts of reclaiming one's time, one's voice, one's presence in the world. And then comes the paradox. In the breaking, we are made whole. The cracks let light in, and the light touches the hidden places we were too afraid to explore. It is here, in the shadow of loss, that transformation begins. We are no longer just a person who loved and lost. We are a person who loved, lost, and rose. What begins as devastation unfolds into awakening. And that awakening is the greatest gift a broken heart can give. Because from that moment on, life is no longer something we beg for, it is something we create. We stop waiting to be chosen, and we choose ourselves. We stop performing, and we begin to live. We stop grasping, and we start allowing. This is why a broken heart is not the end. It is the fiercest, rawest, most beautiful beginning. In the hollow aftermath of heartbreak, something ancient stirs. The shadow awakens. This is not the shadow cast by the sun, but the inner shadow, the collection of everything we have denied, buried, and feared within ourselves. Heartbreak tears away the polite surface, and what rises is raw, unfiltered, and often uncomfortable. Rage, jealousy, resentment, helplessness. These are the visitors at the door when love is gone. But the shadow is not our enemy. It is the part of us that has been waiting, patiently, sometimes for years, to be seen. Until heartbreak, most people live avoiding this encounter. They stay busy, distracted, clinging to relationships, to work, to noise, anything that keeps them from facing what lurks within. But when the heart shatters, the noise fades, and in the quiet, the shadow speaks. The anger that rises is not just about the lost love. It is about all the times we swallowed our truth. The jealousy that burns is not just about the one who left. It is about the parts of ourselves we abandoned trying to be loved. The despair that sweeps over us is not only for the relationship that ended, but for the life unlived, the parts of ourselves we silenced. This is the painful gift of the shadow. It hands us back what we tried to discard. It says, "Here, take your anger, your hunger, your grief. They are yours, and they are not shameful. In fact, they are the map back to wholeness." Most people fear the shadow because they mistake it for darkness. But the shadow holds immense creative power. It is from the shadow that art is born, that new desires surface, that transformation takes root. When we dare to face it, we begin to integrate the pieces of ourselves we left behind. Heartbreak creates the crack in the ego through which the shadow can enter. Suddenly, we see our own patterns, the clinging, the control, the games we played. We see where we shaped ourselves to fit someone else's mold. And this seeing, as painful as it is, becomes the soil where something new can grow. The integration of the shadow does not happen through force. It happens through acknowledgement. It happens when we say, "Yes, I am angry, I am grieving, I am terrified, and yet I remain. I do not run from myself." This act of staying, of not abandoning oneself in the darkest hour, builds an unshakable core. It is here that life begins to change in profound ways. A person who has walked through heartbreak and made peace with their shadow emerges with a new kind of presence. They no longer shrink themselves to be liked. They no longer perform happiness to avoid discomfort. They are willing to be real, and this makes them magnetic. From this place, creativity surges. The energy once spent on holding back erupts into expression. People paint, write, dance, build, create. The pain transforms into a wellspring of possibility, and the person discovers, "I am not my heartbreak. I am the vast unfolding force that contains it." This realization changes everything. Work becomes more authentic. Friendships become deeper. Boundaries become clearer. There is a shedding of false roles, of tired stories, of masks that no longer fit. And in this shedding, life opens. Heartbreak, when met fully, is not a wound that scars us forever. It is an initiation. It is the place where we meet our edge and discover we can go beyond it. It is the moment we stop chasing perfection and start embracing reality. And in that embrace, we become whole. So the shadow that once terrified us becomes an ally. It leads us into the depths so that we can rise more complete. And the life that emerges on the other side is not just a return to what was, it is a breakthrough into what can be. We do not just heal from heartbreak, we are remade by it. And in that remaking, we find a freedom we never knew we were missing. When love collapses and the world tilts off its axis, control slips through our fingers like sand. What we thought we had mastered, the shape of the relationship, the narrative of our lives, the image we presented to the world, all dissolves. Heartbreak is not just about the loss of a person, it is about the loss of control over the story we were telling ourselves. For so long, we cling to the illusion that if we say the right words, if we act the right way, if we hold on tightly enough, we can keep love from breaking. But love was never ours to control. It is a wild, living force, not a possession. And when it slips away, we are left standing in a room filled with the wreckage of our strategies, facing the truth we worked so hard to avoid. Heartbreak teaches the most humbling lesson. We control almost nothing. Not the feelings of another, not the future of a relationship, not even the exact course of our own emotions. At first, this feels like defeat. The hands that once held on so tightly are now empty, and the temptation is to close them into fists, to fight, to resist, to deny. But slowly, if we let it, a new kind of freedom arises. Because when we stop trying to control life, we begin to participate in it. We learn to ride its waves instead of trying to dam the river. The surrender that heartbreak demands is not about giving up. It is about giving in to the truth of what is, and discovering the power that lives in letting go. There is an immense relief in no longer managing someone else's perception, no longer choreographing every moment to keep a relationship afloat. In this space, the self begins to breathe. We discover who we are when we are not performing, when we are not bending, when we are no longer consumed with holding everything together. Without the distraction of control, attention shifts inward. We begin to notice the places where we abandoned ourselves, the times we said yes when we meant no, the times we smiled through pain, the times we tolerated what should have been non-negotiable. This noticing is not an act of shame, but of reclamation. We retrieve the parts of ourselves we sacrificed at the altar of love. What emerges is a quiet, steady strength. It is not the strength of force or domination. It is the strength of presence, of being anchored in one's own truth. This strength does not seek to conquer life, but to meet it as it is. And from this place, life becomes less about control and more about connection. With self, with others, with the unfolding mystery of existence. Heartbreak, paradoxically, prepares us for real love. Because real love cannot be controlled. It cannot be forced or scripted. It can only be met, moment by moment, with openness and courage. To love after heartbreak is to step into the dance without trying to lead, to give without grasping, to receive without demanding. This transformation ripples into every area of life. In work, we become less obsessed with outcome and more engaged with process. In friendship, we become less concerned with appearances and more attuned to truth. In creativity, we release perfectionism and allow spontaneity. Life stops being a project to manage and becomes an experience to inhabit. The loss of control reveals that we never really needed it to begin with. What we needed was presence, authenticity, surrender, and heartbreak, as brutal as it feels, breaks the chains of control and offers us the chance to live more fully, more honestly, more freely. In the letting go, we find not emptiness, but spaciousness. And in that spaciousness, life begins to breathe through us again, fresh, unpredictable, alive. There is a peculiar silence that settles after the storm of heartbreak, a silence that is both unfamiliar and terrifying. In that silence, we find ourselves alone, not just without the other, but without the identity we built around them. This aloneness is raw, total, undeniable. It is the kind of solitude that strips away the noise, the distractions, the illusions we use to keep ourselves safe. For many, this solitude feels like a punishment, but in truth, it is an initiation. It is the moment when the soul is called to return to itself. We were never meant to live distracted from who we are, but heartbreak forces the confrontation. It leaves us sitting in rooms we once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoing with the sound of our own breath. It leaves us walking streets we once walked side by side, now alone with our own thoughts. At first, the loneliness is unbearable. Every corner of the day aches with absence. The bed feels too big, the silence too loud, the hours too long. But slowly, imperceptibly, something begins to shift. The loneliness does not disappear, but it softens. The sharp edges wear down. The solitude, once an enemy, becomes a mirror. In that mirror, we begin to see what we could not see before. We see the ways we compromised too much. We see the places where we gave away pieces of ourselves just to keep the connection alive. We see the hunger we carried, a hunger not just for love, but for approval, for recognition, for someone to make us feel whole. And with that seeing comes the first trembling breath of freedom. The paradox of solitude is that it does not isolate us from life. It reconnects us to it. Without the noise of constant companionship, we begin to hear the quiet music of the world. We notice the shifting light on the walls. We taste our food with new attention. We walk through the city and see faces we never saw before. We realize that we were never as present as we thought, that in clinging to another, we had drifted away from the texture of life itself. And then, something even more surprising happens. We begin to meet ourselves. Not the version we presented to the world, not the edited self we showed to our partner, but the unvarnished, untamed self. The one who laughs too loudly at old jokes, who dreams strange dreams at midnight, who carries old wounds and unfulfilled longings. We meet this self not as a project to fix, but as a companion to befriend. This is where the true healing begins, not in rushing to fill the void, not in numbing the ache, but in standing still long enough to feel what is there: the grief, the rage, the regret, the relief. It all rises and falls like waves, and we learn to ride those waves without drowning. We learn that feelings do not break us, resistance does. With time, solitude becomes spaciousness. We begin to feel the ground beneath our feet again. We begin to sense the shape of our own desires, the quiet pull of our own passions. We remember what it is like to create, not for applause, but for the sheer joy of creating. We remember what it is like to rest, not because we are exhausted, but because rest is holy. Out of this spaciousness, something miraculous emerges, the capacity to stand on our own, not as a declaration of independence, not as a performance of strength, but as a quiet, grounded truth. We are enough. We are enough without the constant mirror of another's gaze. We are enough in our messiness, our incompleteness, our becoming. This shift touches every part of life. In work, we stop seeking validation and start seeking meaning. In relationships, we stop clinging and start meeting. In creativity, we stop censoring and start flowing. Life becomes less about proving and more about being. And perhaps most importantly, we stop fearing solitude. We stop running from our own company. We begin to understand that the capacity to be alone is the foundation for the capacity to love. Because love is not the merging of two halves, it is the dance of two wholes. It is not the filling of a void, it is the celebration of shared fullness. Heartbreak leads us to this truth, not by design, but by necessity. It strips us down, burns us clean, leaves us trembling in the dark. And then, in that dark, we discover the light we carry inside. We discover the home we thought we could only find in someone else. And from that home, we step back into the world, softer, stronger, more whole than we have ever been. Pain is often seen as an enemy, something to fight, to avoid, to silence. But when the heart breaks, pain arrives not as a punishment, but as a teacher. It moves in, uninvited, unapologetic, and begins its brutal, transformative work. At first, we resist. We try to drown it in distractions, in work, in noise, in fleeting comforts. But pain is patient. It waits, and when the distractions fade, when the noise settles, it is still there, waiting to be heard. The first lesson pain teaches is presence. We cannot outthink pain. We cannot outrun it. It pulls us back into the body, back into the moment, back into the raw immediacy of feeling. Every breath becomes a reminder of what was lost. Every heartbeat echoes with absence. And yet, in this rawness, we are undeniably alive. Pain reminds us that we have loved, that we have risked, that we have dared to open. It marks us as human. Slowly, pain peels away the layers we have wrapped around ourselves. It reveals the parts we neglected, the dreams we deferred, the truths we silenced. It brings up old wounds, not to torture us, but to be healed. Grief is never just about the present loss. It reaches backward, unearthing the losses we never fully faced, the griefs we buried beneath busy lives. In this way, heartbreak becomes a portal, opening into depths we might otherwise never explore. The second lesson pain teaches is humility. Heartbreak shatters the illusion that we are in control, that we can guard ourselves against loss, that we can manage love like a well-ordered plan. It humbles us before life's wildness, its unpredictability, its refusal to be domesticated. And in this humility, something tender awakens: compassion. We begin to understand the vulnerability of others, the quiet battles they carry, the griefs they hide behind small talk and smiles. Our own pain softens us. It expands our capacity to hold space for the pain of the world. But perhaps the most profound gift of pain is its ability to awaken us. In the numbness of routine, in the trance of habit, we often drift through life half asleep. Pain jolts us awake. It snaps the threadbare stories we tell ourselves. It calls us to examine what truly matters. What do we want to give our life to? What is worth our time, our energy, our devotion? Heartbreak strips away the inessential. It sharpens our attention to what is real. In the aftermath of heartbreak, many find themselves drawn to new paths. They return to abandoned passions. They reach out to estranged friends. They step into creative projects long postponed. They take risks they once feared. Pain does not just break, it also clears. It burns away the false, the superficial, the stagnant, making space for something truer to emerge. This is where transformation takes root, not in the avoidance of pain, but in the turning toward it. When we stop seeing pain as the enemy, we begin to listen. We ask what it wants to teach. And in that listening, we become apprentices to our own becoming. We learn resilience, not the brittle resilience of denial, but the supple resilience of integration. We learn that we can break and mend, that we can fall and rise, that we can be both wounded and whole. As the days turn into weeks, the sharpness of the pain softens. It does not vanish, but it reshapes itself. It becomes woven into the fabric of who we are. We carry it not as a burden, but as a thread of depth and authenticity. We become people marked by experience, carved into shape by life's unpredictable hand. And in this carving, we find our own contours. We become intimate with our own edges. Pain also teaches gratitude. When we have known loss, we begin to cherish presence. We savor the quiet moments, the fleeting joys, the small mercies. We understand, in a way we could not before, that nothing is guaranteed, that every connection is a gift, that love is always a risk. And yet, knowing this, we open our hearts again, not because we have forgotten the pain, but because we have been deepened by it. The self that emerges from heartbreak is not the same self that entered it. It is a self tempered by fire, softened by sorrow, strengthened by survival. It is a self less interested in perfection and more attuned to realness. It is a self that no longer needs to prove or pretend. And in this shift, life opens in unexpected ways. Heartbreak, in its strange alchemy, turns pain into wisdom. It teaches that endings are also beginnings, that loss can be a portal to self-discovery, that vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of connection. And when we let it, when we surrender to its fierce grace, pain leads us home, to ourselves, to life, to the wild, tender heart we thought we had lost, but that was waiting all along to be found. There is a moment after the long night of heartbreak when something begins to stir in the ashes. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not announce itself with triumph or fanfare. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, the first breath of strength returning to the body, the first flicker of clarity breaking through the fog. This is the birth of inner power, the slow, steady rising that comes after the fall. For so long, life was organized around the other. Days were shaped by their presence. Choices were filtered through their needs. Dreams were tangled with their approval. When the relationship shattered, it left behind a void. At first, that void was unbearable, but in time, it became spacious. And in that space, a new kind of self began to form. Not the self we performed for love, but the self we had forgotten in the performance. This new strength is unlike anything we have known. It is not the brittle strength of pretending we are fine, of forcing a smile, of pushing through pain. It is the quiet, grounded strength that comes from having walked through fire and survived. It is the strength of knowing we can sit with discomfort, face loss, endure grief, and still remain whole. This kind of strength does not shout. It does not need to prove itself. It simply is. Out of this strength comes a shift in orientation toward life. Where once we waited for someone to save us, we now step into the role of our own savior. Where once we believed love would fix our broken places, we now realize healing is an inside job. Where once we sought meaning in the eyes of another, we now turn inward to reclaim the parts of ourselves we once abandoned. This is the moment when self-realization begins to bloom. We start to notice what truly lights us up, what we long to give our energy to, what makes us come alive. We stop waiting for permission to be ourselves. We stop shrinking to fit into the roles we once thought were required. We begin to honor our boundaries, to speak our truth, to walk away from what no longer serves. And something astonishing happens. As we turn toward our own fulfillment, the world responds. Opportunities appear. Connections deepen. Creative impulses spark to life. The energy that was once tied up in holding together a collapsing relationship is now freed to nourish our own becoming. We start projects we once postponed. We take risks we once feared. We step into our gifts with a sense of urgency, as if we know now how precious time is. The transformation is not just internal. It ripples outward. People notice the change. They sense the new solidity, the groundedness, the authenticity. They are drawn not to a polished mask, but to a person who has been to the depths and returned with treasures. This is the paradox of heartbreak. The very experience that strips us bare also makes us radiant. And with this radiance comes discernment. We no longer settle for scraps of affection. We no longer tolerate dynamics that drain our spirit. We have seen too clearly what happens when we abandon ourselves, and we are no longer willing to pay that price. We choose with care. We say yes from a place of fullness, not desperation. We say no with grace, not guilt. Most importantly, we begin to understand that love is not about possession, not about completion, not about fixing one another. Love is about presence, about witnessing, about walking alongside. It is about meeting the other as a sovereign being, not as a project or a prize. And we come to this understanding not through theory, but through the hard-earned lessons of our own breaking and mending. The journey of heartbreak and recovery reshapes our relationship to power itself. We realize that true power is not control over others, but mastery over ourselves. It is the power to stay soft in a hard world, to remain open in the face of disappointment, to choose love again even after loss. It is the power to keep expanding when life invites contraction, to keep trusting when fear whispers that it is safer to close. This power also changes how we move through the world. We become less reactive, more deliberate. We pause before we speak. We listen more deeply. We hold ourselves with compassion when old wounds surface. We become fierce protectors of our own peace, not out of selfishness, but out of a deep understanding that we are responsible for the energy we bring into every room. As this integration deepens, we begin to taste a freedom we may never have known before. The freedom to be unapologetically ourselves. The freedom to pursue what matters without constant approval. The freedom to rest in our own presence without loneliness. And this freedom, in turn, becomes a gift we offer to others. The permission to be real. The invitation to meet us as they are, without masks, without pretense. Heartbreak, then, is not just an ending. It is an awakening. It is the shaking of the ground beneath our feet so that we remember we can fly. It is the breaking of old containers so that we can grow beyond their limits. It is the death of a chapter and the birth of an entirely new book. And in that new book, we are no longer just characters reacting to someone else's script. We are the authors, pen in hand, hearts open, ready to write the next radiant page. There comes a moment when the ache softens, when the sharp edges of loss no longer cut so deeply, when the air feels lighter around the heart. This is not the erasure of what happened, not the forgetting of love or the denial of grief. It is the quiet arrival of peace. And with this peace comes a new way of seeing, a new way of walking through the world, a new understanding of love itself. We once believed love was possession, was merging, was the filling of the spaces inside us we feared to touch alone. We believed love was completion, that in finding the other we would find ourselves. But heartbreak taught us otherwise. It showed us that no one can complete what we have abandoned inside. It showed us that love, real love, is not dependency or escape, but presence and freedom. After the fall, after the grief, after the long dark nights, something tender and astonishing begins to bloom. We discover that love is not about holding tight, but about opening wide. It is not about bending to please or shrinking to fit. It is about standing in the fullness of who we are and meeting another in the fullness of who they are. Love becomes less about need and more about gift, less about control and more about trust, less about permanence and more about presence. This shift transforms how we relate, not just to lovers, but to friends, to family, to life itself. We become less attached to outcomes, more anchored in experience. We let people be who they are, and we let ourselves be who we are. We listen with fewer agendas, we give with fewer conditions, we love with fewer demands. And in this spaciousness, relationships deepen in ways we never imagined possible. Perhaps most beautifully, we become more alive to the world. The small things that once went unnoticed, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the laughter shared with a stranger, the quiet of early morning, become moments of quiet joy. The gratitude that awakens after heartbreak is not forced. It rises naturally, like grass through the cracks of an old sidewalk. We begin to see that life was always offering itself to us, even in loss, even in absence, even in pain. This is the real miracle of heartbreak. It returns us to life, not as we wanted it to be, but as it is. Messy, unpredictable, fragile, precious. It teaches us that we can lose and still love again, that we can break and still open again, that we can grieve and still find beauty again. It teaches us that the heart, however battered, was made to heal, and in healing, it grows larger, softer, stronger. What rises from the ruins is not the old self patched back together. It is a new self, forged in the fire of loss, shaped by sorrow, polished by resilience. It is a self less afraid of endings, less seduced by illusions, more anchored in truth. And with this self, we step into the world not seeking to be saved, but ready to meet life as it comes, with open hands, with clear eyes, with a heart ready, always, to begin again. The journey through heartbreak is never one we would choose, but it is, without doubt, one that transforms us. And when the dust settles, when we stand quietly in the aftermath, we know something we did not know before, that we are whole, not because someone completed us, but because we learned to come home to ourselves. That love is not the destination, but the way we walk, and that even in breaking, the heart was always learning how to love more deeply. There is a softness that follows the storm, a hush that settles deep inside. It is the quiet of someone who has walked through fire and emerged not unburned but transformed. The heart, once shattered, now beats with a different rhythm, slower, steadier, truer. There is no need to rush, no need to grasp, no need to prove. In this stillness we understand. We were never broken beyond repair. We were only broken open. Through the cracks, the light entered. Through the loss, we found space. Through the ending, we were offered a beginning. And now, as we walk forward, we carry not just the memory of love lost, but the wisdom it left behind. We carry the strength of having faced ourselves, the grace of having forgiven, the courage of having begun again. This is the quiet triumph of a heart that was broken and chose, despite everything, to keep beating. We're sure you've discovered plenty of value, so subscribe now and stay connected.